In today's episode of Work at Life, we are talking about leading fearlessly and confidently without needing to constantly prove yourself. I think we can all relate to that. Join us and our special guest and architect of leaders, Mihaela Berciu. Welcome to Work at Life. This is a show for everyone who believes that work should be just as fulfilling as life outside of work, and that the way to get there is through building more human workplaces. I'm Maddie Grant, a culture designer and co-founder of a culture consulting firm called Propel, and I'm your co-host alongside my fabulous friend Sonia Lucina, an organizational psychologist heading up the workforce division at Question Pro. All right. Hi, welcome, Mihaela. Please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about your background and who you are.
Hi, so my name is Mihaela Berciu. I'm an architect of leaders, and I work with C-level executives, senior executives, and business owners. And I help them lead with ease and also get to the point where they actually enjoy leading others, because it might seem that for leaders is a easy thing and a pleasurable thing to be in that position of leadership, but maybe to a lot of people's surprise, it's not really that enjoyable. So my work with them is to get them to the point where it feels more pleasurable to lead.
I love that. And I'm sure, yes, leadership is something that seems easy and natural, from the outside, but it takes a huge amount of work to become a better leader, as we know on this podcast.
It does. Leadership. When people get in the role, in a leading role, leadership is expected by default, and it's hardly ever the case.
That's true. So Sonia, you want to kick off with our data point as always, and then we'll dig into the conversation. I'm excited.
Yes, I will. And this topic I'm particularly passionate about because I think back to the conversations that I've had with people, especially when it comes to like very technical roles, where people are promoted. And especially now, I feel like before we always expected people to lead effectively and set team goals and measure those goals and develop others. But now in some ways, I feel like we expect them to even be superhuman and be very empathetic and be compassionate and vulnerable and relatable. And it's these kinds of things that were maybe not always innate to people and not always taught. So I feel like there's always been this phenomenal opportunity to develop leaders, but now probably even more so. And I remember for me, slightly different. It wasn't necessarily a leadership moment, but when I was younger and I was finishing my PhD, I was very studious and I was very focused on the quality of my work and the quality of my research. And then I realized when I started to go into the working world at present, that in some ways I was expected to be an entertainer as well, that I was expected to be charismatic and warm and relatable. And I thought, well, what do you mean? But like, I do numbers really well. I can't do these other things. And I think that was some of my first steps into leadership. But I remember that internal battle of, wow, I never knew that this was going to be an expectation for me to be successful. Okay, bring it up, but how do I do it? So it's very fortunate that there are people like you in the roles that help leaders really go in and feel more comfortable. Now with that, with our data point, as Maddie had mentioned, really the topic of our conversation is how can you really lead fearlessly and confidently without constantly needing to prove yourself? And so to frame our conversation, we went out and asked 300 workers in the US, how often do you feel like you need to prove yourself at work? Like, what does this actually look like? And so 22% of people said that they always or almost always feel like they need to prove themselves at work. And 24% said often. So between that, it's almost half of the people that are, with relatively high frequency, feeling like they have to prove themselves. Then the next one dropped down to 22% of people who said sometimes. And then rarely we had 13, and never or almost never 19% of people. And so one of the things pre-recording this session that we had started to talk about was it's not very often in research that we find like a relatively even distribution in a question. Usually when it's, a frequency kind of question, people tend to sway to one side or the other. So Mihaela, what do you think about this data? Was it surprising to you that was so almost evenly distributed, or is that what you find often in your practice?
I think it is a bit surprising, but at the same time, if always and almost always and sometimes can easily be, because what I find is there are good days and bad days. So if you ask someone in a good day, they'll say, sometimes. But if you catch someone, in a challenging day, they'll say always. And this being two answers to the same question, depending on the time you ask the question. So to me, sometimes and almost always is kind of very close together. I
It's
would
fluid.
easily I would easily put those two together. What's surprising in your survey, I think, is the almost never 19%.
Yeah.
I think that's surprising. And do we know anything about age or any?
It was well, that's a great, actually, that was the question I wanted to ask you. So in our sample, it was just a random sample of US workers. So presumably it's a mix of ages, a mix of genders, a mix of races. There was no targeting towards a specific group, but that's actually what I was wondering, like in your work, do you tend to see some systematic differences maybe in some of those typical demographics?
Well, yes, and mostly I think the generation that we now call millennials, they and the even younger generations, they tend to have a very different attitude towards work and towards others, and they've been brought up with the idea you do the best you can, and that's it, and that's what's being appreciated. So with that idea in mind, I think they feel they don't have to prove themselves. All they have to do is do their best. Whereas with older generations, we grew up in a different system where the pressure to prove yourself, the pressure to do really well, it was very, very on. If you think about it, when I grew up, in school, we only had three, the first, the second, and the third prizes. There was, and I think we had a mention or something like that. Whereas nowadays, and it's been like that for a while, everybody receives some kind of star, some kind of prize, some kind of thing. Or if even if the grades are not too good, even the marks now, again, when I grew up, the mark was exactly what you did on paper, and that was it, or what you were able to, how you were able to answer questions. Whereas today, the mark is a mix between the knowledge and the effort. So this new generations, they don't feel that pressure, because even if the answers weren't that good, if the effort was there, then their grade was already better. So the society moved into a space where I think there's a less pressure to prove yourself, and more expectancy to show up and do your best. So it might be that's where that could be an answer for that 19%.
Do you think a question just came to mind because I'm trying, I relate things to myself and my experiences and the work that I've done. And I'm curious, have you seen the difference? And in part of it, like, I feel like when it's proving yourself, it's almost working extra hard to make somebody believe that you're worthy of something versus visibility. To say, I'm not necessarily like, do I need to prove my worth? Or is it important to me for my work to be visible? Because you're mentioning the millennial generation, and my mind just jumped to all the social media and all the ways that it's much easier now. Well, it's available to everyone, of course, for all different generations, but something that was maybe a little bit more innate to younger generations to say, I can constantly communicate what I'm doing. So is it a way of proving myself, or is it just a way of showing things that are visible? Because I want people to know. Like, have you seen any differences in that, or is the definition almost very similar? I don't know.
Well, it's not, and I think they're actually two different things, because the need to prove yourself is not, it's very much internal. We don't realize it, but when we make an effort to prove something, it's more to prove it to ourselves than it is to prove it to others. And that's where the pressure comes from. That's where the huge stress comes from, because subconsciously that need is to prove to ourselves, how worthy we are. And sadly, a lot of people, I mean, I can, even say majority of people have a low self-worth, and social media has a big play in that, where the younger millennials and younger generations have play a different game, is they know how to manipulate social media. They know how to manipulate the interaction with others in a way to emphasize their worth, if you want. And they do it very well at work as well. Whereas, again, older generations don't know how to do that, because we didn't have that instrument. We didn't have that tool to work with. And majority of the older generations are quite intimidated by, having to behave offline the way the new generation behaves online. And so that's why, again, maybe for younger generations is easier to go through not having or not feeling the same kind of need to prove themselves, because they know how to manipulate what's going on and make themselves visible, as you said it. Whereas for the rest of us, our focus is still to prove, through the work we're doing. And an example comes to mind. I've working with a client, and it's a bigger project, also organizational culture transformation. And I met with one of the managers of one of the divisions, and the guy is absolutely amazing leader, amazing. But he's very quiet, and he does not boast about anything. He only communicates if there is a problem, never communicates the successes. So when I entered that meeting, the short overview that I had was, well, we don't know what's really going on there. And when I came out of that meeting, I was like, oh my God, he is one of the best leaders and managers in this company. And I told him, you have to learn to be more visible. You have to learn to sell, how good you are. And so yeah, that's probably where not, this difference between generations comes about again.
Well, and that's, I think it's so important for organizations and for people to understand that in some ways the rules of the game are changing, and the tools that we have are changing. And so what we were saying, like some things that maybe made you successful or helped you become successful 10, 20, 30 years ago, it's different today. But for a lot of us that have been in the workplace and have done certain things, and especially like I remember when I first started working, I was in my mid-20s and I loved the job that I had. But I very much, I don't know if it was, imposter syndrome. Like I was a director of a business unit and I knew it was one of my first roles. I was finishing my PhD, so I was a very hard worker. But I remember I wore a turtleneck and a suit every day because I felt like, oh my goodness, I need to make sure that I project this image that people believe that I belong here. But for me, I studied this kind of work a lot. And so my perception has changed over time. And I've tried to change myself as a person. But I know even, little things like Maddie Gee and I were talking about some of the marketing for our business. And we recently talked about TikTok and doing TikTok videos. And I was like, you want me to do what? I don't even have it in
Oh yeah, there's no way.
Like maybe I will, maybe because again, for me, I'm just thinking, the years ahead and how much everything is going to evolve, and to think, if I start to get worried about some of these steps, what's ahead where I'm gonna, say like, oh no way, if I'm saying no way to this. But so I do think like what you're saying is really interesting, probably depending on people's, characteristics themselves, but also their generation, to remember that the rules are changing and to remember to be very open. And a lot of times some things will change quickly. So it is about stepping outside of our comfort zone, to be visible and really make that contribution. But for better or worse, a lot of these things are not going to go away. And so to your point, when somebody is a really, really exceptional leader, there are just some small things that can make them more visible and even more impactful. It's important for them, to be in the culture that supports them and helps teach them how to do it. Yes. Maddie, I know you've done a lot of research on generations and millennials. I'm sure you've got a lot of thoughts around this topic.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole though.
We can pull it back. It back. Mihaela, is it mostly that you're seeing generational differences, or is it also gender, or what are, and on top of that, what are some of the things, like you mentioned this one organization that you're working with, what are some of the things you would recommend to people? Like, how do you self-reflect and know if you're, doing too much or too little of proving yourself? Like what's like them? Is it mostly about self-perception? Like, how do you really know? And then if you're on the one or the other end of the spectrum, like, what are some practical things that like you could do to correct it maybe, or to think like, I don't need to continually prove myself in the way that I'm, doing X, Y, and Z. It's better if I do these other things and it'll actually be better for me. It'll be better for my career, for my teams, etc.
Well, usually when people try to prove themselves too much, let's just say one thing before we go into that conversation. You shouldn't have the need to prove yourself, because when you're confident and your self-worth, and again, you can be very, very good at your job, but if your self-worth is not at the same level with your knowledge and experience and expertise, you will always feel the need to prove yourself. So the main work that anyone should do is to work on understanding what's happening with their self-worth, and healing that. And when working with that will then ease the need to prove themselves. But until they get there, or if they need some pointers to ask themselves, am I doing too much? Because funnily enough, because the need to prove yourself is subconscious, most of the times people don't even realize how much they're actually doing to prove themselves. They just think, well, I'm doing all of this because I have to, or I'm doing all of this because there's no one else to do it. And so if someone is very, very busy and is overworking, are overworking themselves, that's the first sign that they might be actually over trying to prove themselves. From there on, if they start looking at every single thing they do in a day with as much objectivity as they can, because objectivity at that point is still not available. But if it's a conscious exercise, objectivity can be brought into this assessment. And if they sit down with their calendar, or if they sit down with their to-do list, or however way they work, and they think, okay, is this something that only I can do? Is this really just me? Then yes, perfect. But if it's a no, someone else can do it, then give it to that person, to that someone else. It's delegating, which will take away some of the pressure. If I shouldn't even be doing this, then it should be a complete delete. Because if it's not yours to do, if you're volunteering yourself to do things that are not part of your job description, that should not be done by you, even if it's something very simple, it doesn't matter. It will still take time, away of your time, where you could just be doing nothing. You could be just finishing work an hour earlier, than doing overtime. So this kind of assessment of how much do I throw myself into, that I shouldn't be throwing myself into, or how much do I take on that is not mine to take on. But proving yourself it doesn't stop at what the work that you do and the knowledge that you do. Proving yourself, the need of being liked is it's the same in the same sort of spectrum with the need to prove yourself. So if you start doing things for your colleagues because you want them to like you, you want to be liked, and they will gladly give it to you if they don't have to do it, then you're offering, here it is, and they will. You'll think they like you for being so helpful. That's another way of proving yourself. So it's proving yourself. It's quite a tricky place to be in. But it all starts and ends with your level of self-worth.
Oh, it's interesting, the examples that you were giving, because it definitely gave me something to think about. As I was mentioning before, I thought, when I was younger, I used to do that a lot more. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, maybe I'm doing it, and I'm doing it in a different kind of way, because my calendar is always so full. And I'm always trying to help others. And what's interesting, and I'm going to think about this a little bit, is I think when I was younger, in some ways, I was trying to prove myself more to my leader and my direct boss. But now I think the way that I'm interacting is I feel like I'm always trying to prove myself to my team. And not in a way that I think anything like malicious or bad will happen, because I adore them. I think they're the best group of humans I could have come across. But I think there's always, I will definitely have to do some self-reflection, because when I think about the way that my days are structured and how I spend time with different people, like it's starting, based on your description, to feel like I am trying to prove myself to them, that I'm always trying to like prove that I'm a good leader and prove that I care. And so, very interesting.
The reason I say it's a tricky thing is because where you're in a leadership position and you try to prove yourself to your team in particular, we'll go with that. That is a barrier for them to develop and to grow, to reach their potential, or maybe even exceed their potential. Because if you protect them too much, if you take on too much in the belief that you're doing them a favor, you're actually not, because they don't get the chance to learn new things. They don't get the chance to have to push themselves to learn new things, to do new things, to see how it feels, to discover and uncover what their limitations are, to uncover how you might be feeling as well. So when in a leadership position, trying to prove yourself is actually damaging to the exact people you're trying to prove yourself. And the other downside of it, and this is something that comes with being, ascending into a leadership position, you think that, and I'm not saying you personally, I'm thinking you, the leader, leaders end up thinking that they need to have all the answers. You don't.
Yeah.
That's why you have a team. And by telling your team, listen, I do not have all the answers, and I do not expect me to have all the answers, and you shouldn't have all the answers individually. We should have all the answers collectively, though.
Yeah.
And that's where the actual team comes together, and that's when people stop trying to prove themselves. Because if the leader constantly tries to prove themselves to the team, then within the team you're encouraging competition instead of encouraging ambition. And because then they will be trying to prove themselves to you and each other. And this kind of competition is limiting, because they're not working as a team, they're working as individuals.
That's so interesting. I was actually thinking about, so I volunteer for a group that supports women in technology. So it's leaders at all levels. But this topic actually came up in conversation with this group in a networking session. But it was specifically around being new to a new job, basically, and either a new leader with a new team or just a new person, in a new company. And we weren't talking about proving yourself, directly, but I feel like a lot of that conversation was almost like an example of a situation where it's not really subconscious. It's actually very conscious. You're new. You think you have to prove yourself to all these people who don't know you yet. But the conversation really swirled around how to build trust, basically, right? So as a manager or as a team member, there are things you can do, just as a person to build trust with your colleagues, including getting to know them and their work styles better. So just a better understanding of how different people like to work. And then specifically how they would like to work with you. And what's interesting is that simple thing sort of goes both ways in terms of whether you're a leader or the direct report, right? But it just felt like that was just such a great example of exactly what you're talking about, where you have to consciously and intentionally open up those communications, those lines of communication with your team, so that you don't have to prove yourself. Because you're right, like proving yourself is just distracting from really working together and building those relationships and getting the job done, right? So I just thought that was an interesting kind of a metaphor, that sort of illustrated what you were saying.
But if you can think of something, it can be anything, not necessarily professionally, in your personal life. If there is one thing where you just know you're really good at, I don't know, it can be anything, let's say you're a really good cook, okay, and you know it. you know it. People absolutely love your food. And so
I'm a pretty good cook, actually.
amazing. So you can relate. When you have people over, it doesn't matter whether they're new people, you know, old friends, family, people who've had your food before or not, because you know you're really good, you won't question yourself, and you won't feel the need to prove yourself at all, because you know how good you are. And when you know you'll be happy to experiment with new recipes, and you'll do it with a lot of ease and a lot of fun and a lot of flow to that process. And even if someone doesn't like you know, something you cooked, you won't be offended and you won't feel in any way challenged, because you know, well, you didn't like it, it's a matter of taste, you know. It's fine. It won't shaken in any way your belief in your ability to cook good food. Well, if you take that example now and you think of your workplace, the minute you feel the need to prove yourself, and it doesn't matter if it's a new job or an old job or whatever job, but if you take, you know, that, make that parallel, if there is a need to prove yourself, then it means you're questioning yourself for whatever reason. So, because you know, when you don't question yourself, you don't think for a second, oh, I need to prove myself. What if they don't believe me? What if they don't trust me? What if? Because that's what if is really, at the end of the day, the question that pops up in our heads when we doubt our abilities. You know, what if I make a fool of myself? What if they laugh at me? What if? And that throws you into a process of overthinking, and overthinking is never ends up well. Overthinking is your worst enemy. It's our worst enemy, and overthinking works like a drill. If you want, you know, the more that the drill goes in circles, because you don't move out of what ifs, and the deeper it goes, the darker it gets. And it's the same with the overthinking. The deeper you get into overthinking, the darker the thoughts, and the more somber the conclusion. And overthinking only happens when you doubt yourself, when your self-worth, your belief in yourself, your confidence in your abilities are not where they should be. So that's why when you start working with, you know, and paying attention to what throws you into that kind of questioning, self-questioning, or fears, that's where you need to stop and ask yourself, okay, why am I feeling so insecure? What is it that makes me feel so insecure? And you'll find the answer. The answer always comes, you know. And it's never the first things that come to your head, which is your conscious giving you the answers. That things, you know, if you sit with that question, you'll get much deeper answers, and that's what you need to work with. And then in a position of leadership, you know, when you start answering these questions, you then start leading with ease and fiercely, because you know there's nothing that can be thrown at you that you won't be able to handle, even if handling it means asking your team for the answer.
Well, I absolutely, you can't see my huge smile right now because my camera's off, but I think that's just the most wonderful way to close out our podcast now that we're at time, because it just rings so true. And I think all of us listening can relate to just having that just feeling of, you know, not being quite sure of yourself. So I really, really love that. So just want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your insights. Sonia, do you have anything else?
Not anything better than that. So just thank you. And you gave me so much to think about. And I'm sure like if I think about things like this all the time as my profession, that I'm sure our listeners will walk away with a lot of ways to self-reflect and look at the way that they interact with others and hopefully realize, feel a lot better about themselves and not feel that need to always be proving themselves. So thank you so much for everything that you shared with us today. I'm very grateful for all the new knowledge and insights.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I do hope your listeners will find some points of reflection and feel slightly better going forward about themselves. That is
awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.